Hello, everyone. I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One. David Rouzer is serving his second term in the United States Congress. His 7th congressional district runs from Wilmington all the way to Johnston County near Raleigh. He also served 2 terms in North Carolina's state Senate, where he represented Johnston and part of Wayne County. David Rouzer did not win his first election until 8 years after he lost his very first election. His experience in politics, well, that began years before he ever took office, shaped by famous politicians named Helms and Dole, shaped by a roommate from Romania, and also by a high school librarian David Rouzer met while registering to vote.
I tell you what, you researched deep to find that.
Yeah, I did.
You
Tell me a little bit about that school librarian you talked to.
Yeah, well, anyhow, I don't remember exactly what age I was. I guess I was right at 18. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been even thinking about register to vote. And so I walked into the library, and there was a lady there behind the counter. And you have to keep in mind and understand that I came from a split family. Mm-hmm. My mom's side of the family have been, over the years, hardcore Democrats, but conservative.
Okay.
But nevertheless, yellow dog Democrats.
Right.
And on my father's side, they were very strong Republicans, and they were from the western part of the state, and had been Republican long before it was cool to be Republican. And so I was conflicted. I never thought much about politics. Of course, I was 18. Who in their teenage years thinks a lot about politics? I mean, most of us don't. And so anyhow, I walked in the library and got my registration card, and I'd been trying to figure out, which way am I going to go here? And so I asked the librarian, or she might have been an assistant librarian, but anyhow, she was behind the counter. And I said, I'm really struggling with this. In your opinion, what's the difference between the Republican Party and the Democrat Party? And she said, well, the Democrats, she said, they're for the working man. They're for people like me and you. And she said, the Republican, they represent the rich. And I thought to myself a little bit, and so I checked Republican. And she looked at me really funny and said, got with the look of, didn't you just hear what I said? And I said, well, you said the Republicans were for the rich, and I plan to be rich. And even she laughed. But the reason why the motivating force there to encourage me to check Republican actually was I was looking for a more thoughtful answer. Not a not a canned answer, so to speak.
Sure.
Because it was a serious dilemma in my mind. Because
Yeah.
I had family on both sides, and I'm trying to figure that out.
Okay, so you make that decision and you go home. What was the response to the other half of the family who were the Democrats?
Oh, I didn't tell them. They found out years later.
Oh, really? So you did? So you never?
Well,
told...
they never asked.
Oh, okay. There you go.
They never asked, and so I never said. But anyhow, when I went to go work for Senator Helms. Of course, obviously, strong conservative
Sure.
Republican. And they certainly knew then.
No, I was going to say. Now, so there wasn't a lot of politics in the Rouzer family growing up? You went to work on the farms in the summer?
Yeah, there was very little discussion about politics on my grandmother's side. I mean, they had campaigned for Jim Hunt and Democrats over the years, I think they voted for Helms too. I don't know how they voted in that Senate race back in 1984. I never asked them. But now, certainly on my father's side, like I said, they've been strong Republicans for a long time. And but around the dinner table, not a whole lot of talk about politics. I do remember in the 1984 Senate race, I'd been watching the Senate ads. And of course, at that time, that was the most expensive race in the country. Very strong negative ads on both sides. And I remember I asked my dad when he came home that night, I said, Dad, who'd you vote for? He said, I voted for Helms. And he said, golly, I hope he wins. That's the first political memory I have of any conversation with my parents about it one way or the other.
Now, you were born in Landstuhl, Germany.
My father was a captain in the Army.
Okay.
And so that's why I was born in Landstuhl. And Landstuhl, I think at that time it was Landstuhl Army Medical Center. And it's still there today.
Right.
And I have no recollection of it, obviously, other than I've got a State Department birth certificate that confirms that's the truth.
Right. Now, how did you come back to North Carolina then? Did your dad retire?
My father grew up in Salisbury, North Carolina.
Okay.
Born and raised there. My mother was born and raised in Johnston County, there just outside of Four Oaks, on the family farm, which has been there since the Civil War. So both sides of the family have deep, deep roots in North Carolina. And so when my father, right after I was born, my mom and dad moved back to Raleigh. We're in Raleigh for a little bit, and then Salisbury, and then my dad was decided to trek out on his own. He'd been working with my grandfather in an insurance and real estate business, but Dad decided he wanted to go his own way. So he landed a job with GTE at the time, and that took him to Bluefield, West Virginia. So I actually had 6 years of my childhood in Bluefield, a little coal mining town.
Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, I remember it very well. We lived right beside Whitethorn Elementary School, and so I'd walk back and forth to school. In fact, we all walked to school.
I walked to my elementary school as a kid. Yeah,
and it, in fact, I don't recall ever seeing a school bus anywhere around. And then GTE transferred my father from Bluefield to their Southeastern Regional Headquarters in Durham, North Carolina, the old Liggett Myers tobacco building there. GTE owned it at the time. And so they moved him there, and that's what took us to Durham. My mom and dad still live in Durham. I went to Northern Durham High School.
Right, I was going to say, you graduated from Northern High.
But I always had a real interest in agriculture. I always loved the farm. My grandfather was a tobacco farmer. He passed at a young age, and I was 10 years old when he passed. He was about 55, 56, which at the time I thought he was older.
No, don't say that to me. Please don't say that.
And now I'm like realizing just how young he is or was.
Is that what you wanted to do? Is that what you thought you might want to do?
Oh, yeah, I always wanted to farm. In fact, that's when it came time to apply to colleges. I applied to NC State, UNC Chapel Hill, UNC Wilmington, Virginia Tech, a few other places. And I actually got into UNC Chapel Hill before I got into NC State for whatever reason. But I chose NC State because of agriculture, because I thought later on after school it was an interest, and I thought that would be the career path I would pursue.
But you had 3 majors there.
I did. That's because
you spent a lot of time studying.
Well, a good little bit, but I did a lot of other things too during my time there at NC State. I was a member of a fraternity, Phi Delta Theta fraternity there, which was a relatively new chapter that had been chartered in 1987, and I pledged in 1992. And immediately, soon after I got pledged, about a semester and a half afterwards, I was elected president of the fraternity. We had about 100 guys, and they were stellar individuals. They were the who's who of the entire campus, basically. In fact, when I was there, Texas Tech, the Phi Delta chapter at Texas Tech, and our chapter at NC State competed for #1 in the country every year. And so we were very talented. Really, really great group of guys. Many of them went on to law school at Harvard and Yale, and engineering, and all kinds of great endeavors. And I always felt like I pulled everybody back a little bit. Everybody was just so talented.
But you had chemistry as a major too. Why?
I did.
Why that? Was that you thought that might help you in the agriculture?
Well, I was going to say the whole reason why I ended up with 3 degrees is I started out in ag engineering. And so I had all this calculus, all this physics, all this chemistry, and I was very good in chemistry, really good in calculus. In fact, I had every calculus class at NC State. The ironic thing is I couldn't do it at all today. If I had a gun pointed to my head, I just hadn't done it in so long.
Right.
And but in any event, I decided one day that I was in my first semester of an engineering class, and I just knew that wasn't for me. And I'd had so much chemistry at that standpoint that I did not want to waste it, and so I ended up. Through the help of an advisor, Dr. Forrest Hintz, and any of your listeners who perhaps had the opportunity to go to NC State and had chemistry at NC State will likely remember Dr. Hintz. He had been there for a long time. In fact, he taught my aunt long before I got there. And anyhow, he encouraged me to go into chemistry, and he said, David, it never hurt you to have a chemistry degree. You can go into pharmaceutical sales, ag business, whatever you want to do. And so that's what I did. He said, you got a great interest in agriculture, go get you an ag business management degree, and I'll help you with your electives so we can get chemistry fit in there. And then a semester before I was to graduate, I realized that if I took one more economics class, I could get an ag econ degree too. And so I said, well, I might as well get all I can get while I can get it.
So you still had ag, and you still had something to do with agriculture as your thought process for what you wanted to do.
Yeah, I interviewed, as any senior would, you're interviewing with various folks, informational interviews, that kind of thing, trying to figure out what you want to do as your next step. And so I interviewed with a lot of ag chemical companies and pharmaceutical sales, but ultimately, I ended up going the political route because of my summer in Prague, the Czech Republic.
I was going to ask you. You've mentioned that to me years ago, and I've never really talked to you much about it. But you said that class that you took in Czechoslovakia was really a game changer for you.
It was.
Because of your roommate, right? Is that what it was?
Yes, he'd lived his entire life behind tyranny, behind the Iron Curtain, under tyranny, and he was from Romania. His name was Stephen, and he and all the other students that were part of that seminar that summer, that program that summer, and there were about 50 of them from the former communist bloc. There were about 10 or so from America, and they recognized and understood more about America than we did. They appreciated more about America than we did. Because they longed. In fact, keep in mind, most of the students I'm talking about that were in this program, they had the resources to get to the Czech Republic, but not to America, to study or do anything. And you could tell who was who in terms of where they were from just based on our clothing. Their clothes were not as nice as ours. They didn't have the wealth, that we had. And but yet their understanding of the world, their understanding of and true appreciation for America was very profound, and that had a real impact on me. And basically, what I discovered, what really hit me, was if you don't have your politics right, nothing else works well either.
You still stay in touch with him? You ever
I've lost touch with them over the last 15 years or so. We stayed in touch for a good while, but I suspect at some point in time we'll have a reunion, and all of us will be getting back together.
Yeah, and I think as we grow older, we don't stay in touch with some of those people until something happens in our lives that makes us want to reach back to them.
That's right. But I've thought about that many a time because I've got correspondence from them going back several years. Many years, and as things change in your life, and they have families and careers, and you grow apart when you don't see folks. But I'm sure we'll be getting together at some point in time.
And so you came back, and that's when you really started to do. That's when you got in with Senator Helms, and you actually went to the Institute on Business and Government Affairs and American Economic and Political Systems. Seemed like a couple of training ground kind of classes almost.
Well, the IBGA was the summer of 1993, and that was through the Fund for American Studies.
Right.
And they were housed there at Georgetown University, and that was an internship on the Hill with Thad Cochran's former chief of staff. Bill LaForge, and then classes as well, talking about the government-business relationship, which was intriguing to me. It was the following summer, however, that was the American Institute on Political and Economic Systems. That's the program I'm talking about in Prague.
Right.
And that's where it really hit home to me that if you don't have your politics right, nothing else works well either.
And so you went to Capitol Hill, and you sought out an opportunity with.
Well, a lot of everything in politics. So much of it is timing.
All right.
And in this case, it's timing. Well, look at life. A lot of it's timing.
Yes, it is.
So you prepare, and you don't know what's going to be presented to you, and sometimes you end up going a different route than what you anticipated. But I was graduating December 1994. And keep in mind, November of 1994, you had the big Republican sweep in the elections.
Yep, Speaker Gingrich was the contract with America. And
Republicans had been in the wilderness for 40 straight years. Had been in the minority. And so it was a big moment. And I was graduating that December. I knew you had all these new members coming in. I figured, well, shoot, man, with this change in power, a lot of these members are going to be looking for people to help them on their staff. And what I didn't realize at the time was just how hard it was to get a job on Capitol Hill, because I'd not been involved in anybody's campaign, and my family was not well connected in any way, not big donors or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And so I went up to D.C. and I started knocking on doors. And if I knocked on one, I knocked on 1,000 probably. And
what did that teach you?
Well, perseverance. If you have a pleasant personality and are nice and accommodating and present yourself well, good old-fashioned hard work, knocking on doors works pretty well.
Also teach you to be humble a little bit, because you think I have a lot to give, and and all of a sudden you're looking for somebody and they say thanks but no thanks kind of thing.
Well, it's been a blessing for me. I've never thought a significant. Well, let me put it this way: I've never thought too highly of myself anyway. Just naturally for whatever reason, and so that aspect of it has always come pretty natural to me. But yeah, I was brand new on the block. I didn't know anybody, and I was just trying to be nice to folks and offer my services where I could. And so I just started knocking on doors and met a lot of people. And, everywhere I went, people would say, well, have you ever worked on anybody's campaign? I was
Right.
like, well, no. They're like, ever worked on the Hill? And I was like, well, no. I just got here. I just got here. And the refreshing thing about Senator Helms was I met his staff first, and they really liked me, his chief of staff in particular. And he introduced me to Senator Helms. And I remember in my conversation with Senator Helms, the senator said, I guess everybody asks you if you have Hill experience. I said, yeah, all the time. He said, it's kind of like they think you ought to be born with it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I said, well, yeah, you could say it like that. And he said, well, how about a job? And so that's how it started.
Wow.
Now, I did not start on his personal staff in the office. They were in need of help on the campaign side because they were gearing up the 96 reelection campaign. And they thought I would make a really good fundraiser there in Washington. And the unique part about that is Helms had never done any fundraising in Washington. So it was a brand new endeavor for them. And in hindsight, it was really a brilliant move by them because, they didn't have to pay me much. And I was thrilled to do it because it was a neat opportunity. And we raised a lot of money for him there.
What did it teach you, though? I mean, because those of us who who are not in politics, it's one thing to ask somebody for their vote, their most precious commodity. At least in my mind, it is.
Sure.
But a second thing about asking people for money. What did that teach you about that? Is that difficult?
Oh, it is. But it's all sales. It's really all sales. In politics, you're selling yourself. And people understand that, and there are folks that are accustomed, to giving to candidates. And in Washington, basically my job was to work the political action community, the PAC community, the business community. And I found everybody in Washington, D.C. that loved Helms, and believe me, I found everybody in D.C. that hated Helms. I found them both.
Oh yeah, he was that kind of character.
But anyhow, all those that loved him, I could figure that out pretty quick, obviously, and so I would get them to do little industry lunches and breakfast, so that they would get an opportunity to have some one-on-one time, so to speak. And I just thought that would work well. And Helms was not much. Helms hated raising money. He never called anybody for money. He just wouldn't do it. And I remember one time I went in, I said, Senator, I really need you to call these two individuals. And I said, I'll take care of the rest. Okay. He said, what if I don't want to?
Uh-oh.
I said, well, this one time, if you'll just do it for me, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. He said, okay.
Okay.
And so he did.
And then in 2000, you ran for Agriculture Secretary.
Yeah, that seems like a million years ago in a way.
Was that your first foray as David Rouzer, a candidate, outside of the fraternity election on campus?
Yes,
but is that the first foray?
It was, and the reason why that came about is after the election in 96, re-election of Helms in 96, I moved over to handle agriculture and trade issues for Senator Helms on his personal staff. And we were in the middle of all the tobacco battles back then, too, because tobacco was under the portfolio of ag. That was one of my key focuses as well, obviously. And so I learned a lot at a very early age, got to be well known representing the senator back home, particularly in eastern North Carolina, where so much of agriculture is based. And Jim Graham had just announced that fall of 1999, right before Christmas, as I recall, that he was not going to run for re-election.
And he had been the ag commissioner for decades.
For 36 years.
Yeah.
For 36 years. And he and Helms were very close. And I had grown to be very, very close to Jim Graham. In fact, I was a pallbearer in both of their funerals, a Helms funeral and Jim Graham's funeral. One was Democrat, one was Republican. But those are the two individuals probably who have shaped me most politically. I'm probably a hybrid of both of them. I'm a different personality than both. Mm-hmm. But both probably have had more of an impact on shaping me politically than any two individuals that I've run across and had the opportunity to work with. So I go to Helms and Dot, his wife, and I say, hey, there are some folks in the state that have talked to me about this because they don't feel like they have a real viable Republican candidate who's been in the Republican apparatus. And what do y'all think? And Helms looked at me and he said, when's the primary? I said, early May. He said, well, son, he said, you don't have enough time to hurt yourself. All you can do is help yourself.
Talk about advice.
And but when you considered it, that was really true.
Yeah.
His point was
Right.
go for it because all it will do is help you, even if you don't prevail.
Get your name out there at least. Anyway.
And he said, by the way, he said, I think you'll do well. And he said, now I've never gotten involved in primaries, and he said, I don't feel like I can change my stance on that now. He said, but now Dot over here, she can do whatever she wants to. And so Dot was my campaign finance chairman,
Wow.
campaign chairman for that race. And she did a letter for me. And, of course, those that really knew that Helms was obviously very strongly supportive. And we did fairly well in that race, considering I had very few resources. I think I raised about $60,000, which, by the way, matched about what everybody else raised.
Back then was a lot of money.
Yeah, and Steve Troxler, who's a very good friend, he was in that primary as well, and was relatively new to the Republican Party at that time. But he, as I recall, he gave himself about $150,000, $200,000 loan, and he had a grassroots network all over North Carolina that was just really significant. And then Tom Davidson had been the previous Republican nominee, and he had a lot of name identification. So I learned two things from that race that were very instructive. One is if you've been on the ballot, it just helps you substantially, for later on. Number two is money. If you don't have the money, you can't sell yourself.
Yeah.
All things being equal, money can be the difference.
Because back then you didn't have social media. You didn't have podcasts. Candidates didn't have their own websites where they can get their message out. So you really relied on
Heck, you hardly
media.
had a cell phone.
Right.
Cell phones were not all that
Bag
prevalent.
phones probably back then, wasn't it?
Bag phones. Yeah, that's how much the world has changed just in a very short period of time.
Yeah, since the year 2000. Yeah. Now, you actually took some time off, though, to go back to NC State.
I did. I got out of that primary, and
but was that were you thinking at any point in time there to get into education and out of politics at this point? Was this a juncture where you may have been thinking about, well, maybe politics in Washington isn't for me, I'm going to come back to NC State and see?
Well, I was ready to come home anyway. I had done a lot with the senator, and Helms had always told us, he said, once you learn everything you're going to learn, go home and do something good with it, and that's how I felt at that time. I didn't want to go back. And the interesting thing is Helms kept wanting to put me on a leave of absence. And I said, Senator, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it 100%. And I feel like politically and otherwise, it's just better for me to sever my tie completely. And what was very touching about that, though, that I found out later was when Helms ran for the United States Senate in 1972, A.J. Fletcher at WRAL gave Helms a leave of absence.
Oh, really?
And he was trying to do for me what A.J. Fletcher had done for him. And I didn't learn that until later. Because he and I argued about that. I was like, no, Senator. I said, I'm not taking a leave of absence. I think it's really important for me to sever my tie. And I said, now, if you at some point in time want me to come back, we'll talk about that. And but anyhow, when I got out of that primary, the dean at the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at NC State called me. And they were looking for somebody to help them with their congressional relations work as well as work in the North Carolina legislature. And that was a natural fit for me. It was my alma mater, my college. And so I said yes. And was there about a year and a half, and then Helms called. And he said, David, and this was right after 9/11, the 2002 Farm Bill was on the table. He had announced he was going to retire, but he really wanted to make sure he took care of the state. And he said, will you come back and help me on this? And at that time, I took a leave of absence from NC State.
Oh, there you go.
To go back and help Senator Helms with that. And the other thing that was brewing in a big way at that time was the tobacco program was collapsing. And he wanted me to begin work on the tobacco quota buyout, which I ended up staying on with Senator Elizabeth Dole to help see that through. Yeah. And when we got that accomplished, I didn't anticipate this at the time, but I was picking up a lot of supporters all along the way with everything that I did. My work with NC State, my work with Helms, my work with Dole, and then after we secured the tobacco buyout that October of 2004. The spring of 2005, I went to go work in the Bush administration at USDA.
With the agriculture area.
USDA Rural Development.
And that was a different kind of position then for you, wasn't it?
Oh, it was very
a
different.
federal job, and but different than the one you had held.
Yeah, I was. I held two jobs actually, trying to give the taxpayers a good bang for the buck. I was associate administrator of our rural business cooperative programs there at Rural Development. Our flagship program was the loan guarantee program, which made a huge difference for a lot of businesses in rural areas all across the country. And then I was also acting director of legislative and public affairs, which put me in constant contact with the White House and Congress.
So you
and
still had
everybody
some
else.
political doings back then.
Oh,
I
yeah.
imagine that would have given you both sides, though, to see what the department needs from the White House and Congress, and
Well-
then when going to work now, especially as a congressman.
Well, not only both sides, but particularly from the executive branch side, all of the hurdles you go through with the bureaucracies. Nothing is easy. People hear a lot of people talk about it on the campaign trail, red tape. Well, I saw the red tape, up front and personal when I was at USDA. And you have a lot of really good career civil servants, but there's just a lot of boxes that they have to check. And various agencies where everything's got to get cleared, including Office of Management and Budget. You have the politics of the Secretary's office with everybody else. You have the inner politics of everybody who's employed within rural development. You have the Office of Budget and Policy Analysis under the Secretary. I mean, everybody's got their
Alphabet
hand.
soup.
Everybody's got their hand in what you're doing.
Right. And so what sparked, was there a specific point that you decided you wanted to run for state senate from Johnston County?
That was interesting because I went home in late 06, September, October of 2006, in part because I saw the writing on the wall for 2008. I saw there was going to be a big swing. I didn't think that it would take Elizabeth Dole out of office, as popular as she was at the time. But my prognosis was correct on that. I just saw a big swing in the Democrat direction for the 2008 elections. I didn't want to get stuck in Washington. I was ready to come home. I didn't want to go back and work on the Hill. I was ready to do something in North Carolina. And so what I did was I decided that when I came home, I said, I don't want to work for anybody else. I want to be my own agent. I want to be able to do what I want to do politically if I want to do something politically at some point. And so I hung out a shingle and I picked up some clients, some smaller tobacco clients, as well as others in the agriculture arena, and to work on some issues, primarily trying to keep the federal government out of their business.
As a consultant or a lobbyist?
Yeah,
kind of thing?
I was a registered lobbyist for some smaller tobacco guys, trying to keep the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, out of the business of tobacco, which I was philosophically aligned with, and then I did some work on the immigration issue because our farmers have such a hard time finding legal labor. And the H-2A program, the guest worker program, is just a very onerous, cumbrous, program that, quite frankly, really doesn't work very well. It's very costly. And so at that time, there was the big immigration reform effort that Bush was pushing. And so, seeing that movement, Mount Olive Pickle, some other bigger growers and others came to me and said, David, we really could use some help and expertise on the federal side. Would you mind working with us and coaching us on strategy and how to go about this thing? Because if something moves, we want to make sure that this H-2A program is reformed the way it needs to be reformed.
Okay.
And so I gave them a lot of counsel and advice as far as moving that forward. And, of course, then the whole thing ended up falling under its own weight for political reasons and others, and that went by the wayside.
So in 2009, you decided to run for state senate?
So in
08,
07, Fred Smith, and keep in mind, while I was back home, I had gotten involved with the Johnston County Republican Party. They knew me well from my days with Helms, running for Commissioner of Agriculture. I was a known commodity. Fred Smith announced he's going to run for governor. He and Pat McCrory and another gentleman, maybe one other. I can't remember who all was in that Republican primary. But anyhow, Fred was running for governor. And so you can't run for governor and state senate at the same time. So he was vacating his state senate seat.
Okay.
And So the folks there in the county, they said, hey, this would be good for the county, good for you all the way around if you're interested in doing it. And so the way I've always approached every decision is if it enables me to do more for the state in any capacity, then usually I'll take it. Mm-hmm. And I didn't seek it. It timing. It's just how it worked out.
And then after the redistricting happened, followed the 2010 census. Mm-hmm. The 7th district is redrawn. It mm-hmm. was its own little village down here in the coast, and the Republicans redrew it to incorporate all the way up into Johnston County. Yeah. And did that then open up the avenue for you to then run for Congress? Yeah,
it did. The first drawing, a lot of people probably don't remember this, but the first drawing was a very different drawing from the second. Mm-hmm. But the first drawing, G.K. Butterfield had an issue with it and raised a Voting Rights Act complaint, or not complaint, but an issue dealing with the Voting Rights Act as it related to the drawing of his district. And it raised a pretty big ruckus over it. And so the legislature went back and looked at it. And I think the attorneys at the time said, well, GK may have a point here. And so to be on the safe side, they redrew the maps. Mm-hmm. And when they redrew the maps, the 7th district, changed a good little bit. Because,
it went all the way up into Johnston County.
Because all the districts, changed a good little bit. That redistricting, when you press, when you press on the balloon over here, the air goes, elsewhere.
Sure.
And anyhow, the second time around, there was a fella that was working in the legislature. He was interning, actually. And he walks in my office and he says, David, he said, I don't know if you've ever thought about running for Congress or not. He said, but if you are, you ought to take a look at this map. And it was right after it was released. Mm-hmm. And so I looked at the map. And at the time, I had been in thoughtful prayer about what I wanted to do, what was right for me to do moving forward. Because the legislature, it was taking all of my time, and of course it pays very little, right. and so it really curtailed my ability at a time, when I'm really in my prime earning potential, to move forward. $13,000 a year is not a lot.
Doesn't do much, right? Even if you live close to Raleigh, like you did in Johnston County.
The per diem doesn't add up.
Right. Yeah, that's for sure.
And in fact, when you live close to Raleigh, your per diem is taxed, so you don't even get it.
Oh,
you don't even get all of it.
Interesting.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize that. So anyhow, I was in thoughtful prayer about what do I want to do and what's the right course of action for me, because had this opportunity not come along, I probably would have served one more term in the legislature and been done and gone on and done something else.
Would you have run for Congress had the 7th district not gone up to Johnston County? Would you have seen yourself maybe doing it if it was in a different congressional district?
Well,
based on that conversation you had with that person in your office?
Well, when he said you need to take a look at the maps, I went and looked at the maps, and I saw that Johnston was included, and I also knew that it was an open seat, basically on the Republican side. Right. Pentano had run in 2010 and mm-hmm. fallen short and was running again, but I'd had. After those maps were released, I started getting calls from a lot of people, even people down here, that were looking for a different alternative, and so I decided pretty quickly.
Well, what it did, it put a major population area, Johnston County, mm-hmm. into the district where then Congressman Mike McIntyre was a new person to them. So what it did, it really created an opportunity for you right in your back.
Yeah, it did.
Your back
and
seat.
A lot of things in life are timing and just the way the ball rolls.
Right.
And so anyhow, I filed to run. I had one thing I had learned from all my years in politics is the person that strikes first typically wins. And so I knew that if I didn't announce that I was running, there'd be other people from the legislature that would be announcing that they were going to run. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I had enough oomph that if I announced and got in it, I could help keep the field clear. And so I announced really early. In fact, I announced so early, so quickly that I got accused of drawing the district myself and all this other stuff, which really is not true.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, but, it's 6 1/2 dozen of the other when you do something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And the first time around against Congressman McIntyre, you actually had to call for a recount. and less than 655 votes.
Yeah,
out of
655 out of 337,000,
Yeah.
plus a couple extra hundred. And
But that had, I mean, what, I know you tried to put a good face on it at the time, but I imagine, what did coming so close do? Does it hurt even more to finish that close, or does it, well, maybe next time?
well, I think my staff would tell you that I don't get really excited about anything, and I don't get really depressed about anything either. I'm even keeled, just the nature of my personality. And I looked at it this way. I'd done the best I could with what I had. The nature of that election was a little interesting because under our model, if I even came close to drawing even in the coastal counties, I would win the race. Mm-hmm. Ironically, as it turned out, I won Pender, New Hanover, and Brunswick as a block by 50 votes, if I recall correctly. It was very slim win, but nevertheless,
you did what you accomplished, what you wanted to accomplish.
Yeah. Did what we wanted to accomplish. Where I lost was in the inner counties, particularly those like Bladen County, Columbus County, and those two counties in particular. I just got hammered.
Right.
I mean, just killed. In Johnston County, my numbers were slightly depressed than they ordinarily would have been because they had dumped so much negative advertising in on me. Richard Hudson, Mark Meadows, the Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee pulled all their money out of those two races and dumped it into mine there in the Raleigh media market, and running very good, effective negative ads that depressed that vote a little bit. But 655 votes out of 337,000, a little less than 0.2%. So just any little thing could flip it one way or the other.
Right.
And so you basically in that scenario, in fact, it was an automatic recount anyhow, even if I hadn't called for a recount, as I recall.
Right.
Because it was so
less than 1%.
Yeah, because it was so narrowly close. What I learned from that is that number one, that was a floor for me, not a ceiling. That I had a lot of potential to grow, because when I started out down here, nobody knew who I was. Yes, Johnston County accounts for about 20% at the time, 20, 22, 23% of the total vote. But that's hardly 75% of the vote.
Right.
75% of the vote was everywhere else.
Right.
And the other 75% of the district had no idea who I was.
Yeah.
And but now where I was known, I was loved, and I typically would get a high percentage of the vote. Now, as you'll recall, in that primary, I got 82, 83% of the vote.
Yeah, that was between yourself and Ilario Pantano at the time.
In a three-man race.
And then 2014, you run, and there's two primary challengers, Chris Andrade and Woody White.
Right.
But you win that, and you come back a second time. Were you, I think I probably asked you this, but were you a much better candidate that time around?
I'm one of those individuals that the more I focus on something and the more I do something, the better I get at it. And now I may start off in my mind, just horrible, but I improve. My growth potential, the strongest attribute I have is my ability to grow. And I've just noticed that over the entire course of my life. And so I think, yes, I was probably a much better candidate. I had an opportunity to retool my team and reflect on what went well, what didn't go as well, where I would make improvements. And anytime you come back and do something the second time around, you're going to be in that much better shape. Mm-hmm. The other thing, too, is having been on the ballot before, it just helps you in such a significant way. When people have voted for you once, you pretty much have to do something that is completely contrary to what they originally thought for them to vote against you.
In this day and age, how protective are you of yourself? And I mean that in everybody's got a smartphone, everybody's got a camera, everybody's got audio of whatever happens. So even if you want to take a day off, how protective are you of Congressman David Rouzer?
Well, I'm conscious of everything. You have to be, and of course, very innocent things can be taken completely, totally out of context. And but that's one of the drawbacks of public life, particularly in this day and time. Is you do have to be super conscious of how things are perceived, even though You're not doing anything wrong. Nobody else is doing anything wrong. So you're conscious of it. You're conscious.
How much longer do you plan on serving?
Well, that's a great question. I plan to serve for a while, and I've got some things that I'd like to get done for the district, particularly finding a permanent solution to our dredging of our inlets and our waterways and our beach nourishment and renourishment efforts. Those issues are so critical to the economy here. I really want to get that done. I've got some ideas that I'm exploring with my committee chairman in the House, Chairman Brady, who chairs the Ways and Means Committee, as well as Chairman Bill Schuster, who's become a great friend, who chairs the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, which I serve on, related to Trump's infrastructure package that I hope to be able to pursue and help in that endeavor some. I've always viewed every decision, we'll see what the future holds. And as long as I can continue to make a contribution to the district and help the country as well, then I plan to continue to serve.
What do you do on a day off? What's a David Rouzer day off look like? Or do you get any days off?
You don't get much time. One of the things I think that people would be shocked to learn is just how many hours you consume, as an elected official, whether in the state legislature or just county commissioner or a member of Congress. And as a member of Congress, the travel is intense, significant. During the last Congress, I would spend 3 nights in D.C., 2 nights in the northern end of the district every week, and 2 nights here in the Wilmington area every week. And so I made that weekly rotation. Well, that's a taxing endeavor. I can
imagine.
And so that was probably the biggest adjustment for me, because the policy stuff, the politics, all that I'd seen before. That landscape was very, very familiar. But just getting used to physically the taxing toll of all the travel. And then not only that, you got to be on everywhere.
Yeah.
You've always got somebody interviewing you or a meeting, and everything's taped. But
that's part of that's just part of the deal, right?
That's part of the deal.
Yeah.
But it's an enjoyable endeavor when you can do things that really help people. We have a lot of veterans that come to us for help. We can't solve every problem, but we do the best we can to help those, where we can help them. Working with the mayors throughout the district, Hurricane Hurricane Matthew, when it came through, I was part of Hurricane Floyd too.
I was going to say, yeah.
I had a lot of experience with all this stuff. And so all the little things that you do to help people along the way, even something as small as a passport, somebody's trying to get overseas and they realize that their passport has expired the day before.
It's tough sometimes to ask what's the number one this, what's the number one that, but do you have a recollection of something that when you look back, whether it be in the state Senate or whether it be in Congress, and you go, ooh, oh boy, was I wrong, and I wish I had that one back? I mean, any of them jump to mind? Maybe something you learned a lot of?
I try to watch other people's mistakes and not do them.
There you go.
And
try not to commit them yourself?
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
We all make mistakes.
Sure.
Now, I'm very cautious by nature, and I will, if I have a deficiency, I will overstudy things. But the flip side of that is it prevents me, from having those moments.
Right.
And so I really don't have one where I, wish I had done one thing or the other. I've played my cards fairly well, I have to say.
Yeah.
And I try to be thoughtful about all the issues and, recognize I try to put myself in other people's shoes. And that's one thing I learned from Senator Helms is Helms was loved and hated. But it didn't matter to him whether you loved him or hated him. He would do the best he could if you had a legitimate need and a legitimate issue. And he had a real way of putting himself in your shoes, which I always really admired. And Jim Graham told me something that has stuck with me forever. And, of course, Jim Graham was a politician's politician. I mean,
I remember the big hat he wore everywhere.
Yeah, he was he loved public service. He loved his job. He loved people. And he was just really good at what he did. And he always told me, I remember the first time he told it to me, he said, David, he said, always have a tough hide, but keep a tender heart. And,
good advice.
And I have never, ever forgotten that.
When's the last time you dunked a volleyball?
Oh, that was a long time ago. That was a long time ago. Boy, I'm impressed. You really have dug deep. That was when I was a senior in high school, I think.
You could dunk a volleyball?
Yeah, I could dunk a volleyball. Never could dunk a basketball.
Yeah.
But I could dunk a volleyball.
Been a long time since you tried it, I take it?
Yeah, I wouldn't even try it today.
Well, dunking a volleyball may not be high on David Rouzer's to-do list now, but getting reelected will be. Members of the U.S. House of Representatives are elected every 2 years, so he will be back on the ballot again in 2018. If you know someone who would be a good interview, drop me an email at jevans@wect.com. You can also reach out to me on Facebook or Twitter. I'm on those two social media sites every day. And you can download the free podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. Subscribe, and don't forget to leave a recommendation or a review. That helps in the long run. I'm John Evans. Thanks for joining us for another episode of One on One.